Hello, and welcome to the Catella Bubble, where we discuss the British royal family, UK politics, the media, and basically whatever I want. Here we ask the deep questions, like, is Camilla evil? Probably not. And why can't Catella Bubble put out a video at a relevant time? Today is our third installment, discussing the book Endgame by Omid Scobie. This book right here. This is chapters 12 through 15. If you want to watch parts 1 and 2, they are down there or up here. But honestly, if you just want to keep watching, it's probably fine. The chapters are enough standalone that you probably won't get lost, but go watch them later if you have time. And remember, if you like what you see here, leave it a like, write a comment, subscribe. The more people do those things, the more likely I am to put out more videos, give my perspective, and put out content for all you lovely viewers. If you enjoy this content, I also have a TikTok channel, and for more personal essays, you can find me on Substack under my real name, Katie Fonts, at substack.com. The first part, with the subtitle of Camilla, the Transformation of a Mistress, is a no-fuss recounting of Camilla's ascent to the throne, finally being crowned as the Queen Camilla that was the end goal of Operation PB. Though it might seem like this was Camilla's ultimate goal, my interpretation is that this was Charles' goal for himself. To be able to control the world, to fit his vision of Camilla as a woman who would be his #1 confidant. If you remember my last video, you might remember right after the chapter about how Diana's legacy has now been repackaged to the masses to suit the interests of the royal family brand. And this chapter nicely shows the flip side of the coin, as Camilla's image has been changed to suit the interests of the firm, which now boils down to the interests of Charles and Camilla alone. The second part, pivoting to Kate, portrays also a unique juxtaposition with the story of Camilla. Camilla's story seems always driven with the title of Queen first. However, with Kate, the idea that she will soon be queen does not seem to suit her natural inclinations. So let's get into it. In part 1, we get a sort of complete narrative of Operation PB, the PR campaign orchestrated by Charles's team, then later the firm as a whole, to legitimize Camilla. Now, the end analysis of Scobie is that Camilla wasn't too focused on the queen title. What motivated the endless PR campaign to rehabilitation was simply how shitty it feels at being at the bottom of a pile of hate. And I mean, that's kind of fair. I wouldn't want to be hated by the majority of Brits for the rest of my life either. Regardless of the scorn, however, it's clear that Camilla, in a sense, won out. Scobie writes, whether she wanted it or not, and whether the public wanted it or not, polls at the time of finishing this book say a lot of the nation still aren't sure. She is now Queen Camilla. Camilla, as an aristocrat by blood, was prepped for royal life in a way that many others who joined the family were not. Growing up, Camilla was sent to an upper crust girls' finishing school rather than receiving a well-rounded education. Despite this being woefully behind the times, Camilla takes pride in this old-fashioned upbringing, probably because she found success in it. Scobie writes, Camilla was fine with her outmoded upbringing then, and she's proud of it now, a fact that is both admirable and a little troubling, considering where we are as a society 2 decades into the 3rd millennium. Part of this education was learning how to be a good aristocratic lady, learning how to be a socialite. This survival mechanism, described by Scobie as schmoozing and delighting, might have worked in Camilla's favor but of course came at the cost sometimes of negative press in relation to other family members. Camilla learned early on in her journey to positive PR that befriending important media personalities would aid in her campaign. Scobie mentions 3 key figures: Robert Jobson, Rebecca English, and of course the ever-crazy Piers Morgan.
You continue to trash her.
Okay, I'm done with this.
No.
Sorry, no. Sorry.
Do you know what? That's pathetic.
You can trash me, mate, but not my own
No.
stuff. See you later.
I'm being...
Sorry, can't do
This is
this.
absolutely diabolical behaviour.
Scobie mentions that their relationship is built on a wild foundation. Quote, a mutual disdain for all things woke in its 2.0 sense. Behind closed doors, Camilla usually rolls her eyes when topics such as gender identity, unconscious racial bias, and even veganism are raised. It's all lefty nonsense to her. Man, I'm sure this institution is apolitical, I say, rolling my eyes. Not only do these 3 media personalities coordinate to put out positive spin about Camilla, but also negative press on other members of the family. The clear purpose is to make Camilla look more palatable in comparison. This is not really news, considering all that Harry wrote in Spare, as well as just analyzing the work of these 3. For example, I've read multiple Robert Jobson books for this channel. One other interesting figure is Patty Harverson, who Scobie notes worked as Charles's comms secretary for part of Operation PB. I found his mention interesting as he also played a role in the PR rehabilitation of David Beckham after the 1998 World Cup. I watched the Netflix documentary Beckham, which described this media event, and is yet another great example of how vicious and horrible the British media are, which perpetuates the need for spin doctors to manipulate celebrity images in order to end harassment campaigns brought on by the media's carelessness. If you enjoyed learning more about the royals' PR ups and downs and the toxic British media, like as described by Harry and Meghan, Beckham covered similar themes, and overall I'd recommend it. Overall, I get the sense that Scobie doesn't believe that Camilla has a big role to play in the future of the monarchy. She, and more importantly Charles, got what they wanted, the precious titles and the power that comes with them. Scobie mentions that for Charles, quote, no matter how high the stakes, he had to have her in his world. They don't have much interest outside of that to get the institution to evolve. And with Camilla, not only completely missed the boat on 2nd and 3rd wave feminism and actively eye-rolling at ideas like unconscious bias, she's not exactly the progressive voice to propel the institution forward. She's basically just gonna schmooze and enjoy life at the top until she dies. This attitude demonstrates well how the marketing of the royal family as compassionate citizens who sacrifice selflessly for the benefit of the nation is completely bunk. Camilla is a great example of a family member whose actions seem more focused on what allows her to maintain the most comfortable life for herself above the interests of basically anyone she could possibly come across. I'm not one of those people that thinks Camilla is evil or anything, but she will not budge on anything that might disrupt her quiet life of privilege. She stays in the background as much as possible and doesn't push for change that might conflict with her life of luxury. She's not interested in pushing any agenda other than one that helps her stay firmly within the establishment. In that sense, Camilla is calculating, but also in comparison to other family members, is somewhat harmless. She is not interested in the politics of the role. As a woman as well, especially who is married into the institution rather than being born within it, which is the main themes of this chapter, she does not have much influence in the direction of the firm. The institution is first and foremost a patriarchy. Even if she wanted to have political influence, as we see with other examples of women in the family, it's clear that she would not be taken seriously. Thus, she seems to recognize that the best thing for her to do to keep up the cushy queen consort life is to stay quiet, do the bare minimum, and keep good relationships with the people that control the narrative. Part 2. Kate. Moving on to Kate Middleton, looking over this chapter again, I'm so surprised, but also not surprised at all, that the media when this book came out really focused on the Kate parts of the book. They would make it sound like Scobie really dug into Kate and denigrated her. And like, maybe that would be a fair criticism of like the Charles or Andrew chapters. Because yeah, they do seem to have committed crimes, allegedly. But the conservative British media were very protective of Kate's portrayal.
I think a member of the royal family, which has got a lot of people particularly cross when it comes to what's been written about them in the book, is Catherine, Princess of Wales, who's accused of being a part-time working royal, and that she's the monarchy's last shiny thing, which has really upset a lot of people.
Worst of all is Kate. You know, now Katie Keane, last night I looked at some of my pictures of Kate, just thinking, where's he got this from, you know? And she was just, the thing about it, all right, Katie Keane, she is keen, she really does a great job. And, you know, she's got children, 3 children she wants to spend time with. At the same time, she gives an awful lot of her time to the royal family. And she doesn't only just, all right, she turns up in nice outfits and she looks great. And she is a photographer's dream, I have to say, but you know, when I see some of the things she does, you know, like, you know, when she gets involved in sports, she plays sports like she's a sportsman all her life. She just gives everything to it.
I do find his attack on Kate really gratuitous, but of course that is very much Meghan speaking.
Well, it's basically depicting Kate as a Stepford wife that doesn't have much use of the
And she's a wonderful woman. She's doing a terrific job. And the point about him, he's looking for headlines, and us sitting here is giving him headlines. But really, he's an incorrigible rascal who's getting away with it.
There's no big bombshell in here, but it is critical of members of the royal family, in particular Kate. I mean, that's always going to get the headlines, so it's where people are going to turn to at first. He describes her in the book as cold. He criticises her for advocating mental health causes while ignoring her own sister-in-law's cries for help. He says she's technically a part-time working royal. He describes her as being Katie Keane and says the Queen liked her because she was coachable, unlike the strong-minded Princess Diana. And he said she isn't known for her leadership and outgoing nature like Meghan. She's frightened of doing anything other than a photo op. She glides under the radar. She's never challenged the system with public struggles or oversized aspirations. I mean, you can criticise her for that, or on the other hand, you can say that actually she knew what she was doing. She married into this institution and she knew her job was to serve the crown.
Within the text itself is an acknowledgement of this protectiveness of Kate within the institution. Scobie writes, "The palace gatekeepers have always been more vigilant when it comes to Kate, never pushing her too hard, as the road to queendom is a marathon, not a sprint. I think for a long time, people were afraid to make her do something that would make her uncomfortable," a senior aide told me. Kate's comfort often seems to be taken in consideration because of her unique status as a future queen. Scobie even directly makes the comparison in that Kate's image has been crafted over time to be a blank slate in a similar way to Elizabeth. Kate, who reportedly never looks at social media or reads newspapers, seems content as a voiceless symbol of courtly resolve, a totem of stoicism in a time of emotional overdrive. This side of her mostly resembles Queen Elizabeth II, a woman after whom Kate has long modeled her approach to royal life. Perhaps more than anything else, Kate has learned what is paramount for survival in the system: vanishing into your role giving away nothing, and allowing yourself to embody what the public sees in you. The British media loves to use the term secret weapon to describe any royal family member who doesn't immediately fuck up in public. But honestly, I think Kate is the closest thing the institution has to a secret weapon. She is one of the few members pulling positive media attention to the family. She is often stoic, and her mind is impenetrable from the outside. The focus of this chapter is mostly how Kate has handled her public work and being in the spotlight. Namely, that she seems kind of terrified by the media. In a way, that is 100% understandable, but also probably a challenge for an institution that kind of needs her to survive. She is obviously the most interesting royal left standing after Harry and Meghan left as working royals. She's beautiful, she's somewhat charming, and she's not 100% brainwashed into aristocratic customs. Everyone pretty much barely tolerates, if not outright hates, Camilla and Charles. William is a bore now. The kids are too young, and their parents are trying not to turn them into media spectacles. Although, the media's gonna media. Who else is gonna steer this ship? Anne? Edward and Sophie? Please. Quote, put a new glamorous photo of Kate on the front page of a paper, and a sales boost is guaranteed. Charles, Camilla, and William? Unless it's family drama, not so much. Another quote, as the Princess of Wales, Kate has now entered a more pressurized, demanding phase in her royal life, which has put much of the fate of monarchy's popularity on her shoulders. Scobie reports how her team encouraged her in 2019 to go on a famous TV show called Blue Peter, which is a children's show to encourage kids to do projects, get badges, write in. Keep in mind that Kate married into the family in 2011 and has been in the inner circle since she began dating William in the mid-2000s. And yet, an aide stated, quote, she was always nervous about speaking on camera.
As the group head on into the woods, Catherine and I get to chat about her passion for the great outdoors.
Is it something you do a lot now, you know, with your family, you kind of get outside and get in the outdoors?
Yeah,
Do they like going
rain
outside?
or shine, they're dragged outside. But it's great, nice to, you know, sort of encourage creativity, confidence, even a short amount of time, you know, 10 or 15 minutes outside makes a huge difference, I think, to both physical well-being but also our mental well-being.
Well, I tell you what, it is time for us to try and build a den. Is this something you've done before?
Yes, I love it, but I'm in your hands.
Uh-oh, you're getting competitive. Come on, let's go.
Thank you.
For such an important asset to the family, a woman who can bring interest to the family through the typical tabloid topics like fashion, charity, fluff pieces on motherhood, etc., etc. This is a bit concerning for the institution. Scobie writes, there is always a focus on what Kate is wearing. Her clothes, her jewelry, her shoes, her hairstyle, to such an extent that often what she says or does is usually an afterthought. Their secret weapon is very hesitant to do any sort of publicity for the family. The kind of publicity that they so desperately need to keep the institution in the papers and alive. In comparison to other family members, Kate does fewer engagements, including even the least inspiring royals. Scobie even notes, quote, given that Kate was in a public-facing role for 8 years up to this point, the journey to this breakthrough took longer than anyone expected. Scobie opens the chapter with another great illustration of how this breakthrough took a long time. After the Blue Peter event, Kate was scheduled to appear at a garden event with Great British Bake Off star Mary Berry to deliver a speech on the importance of early childhood development.
The amazing fact I learned recently was that 90% of our adult brains are developed before the age of 5. And really what a child experiences in those really early years directly affects how the brain develops, and that's why I think it's so important that all of us, whether we're parents or carers or family members, really engage in quality time with children and babies from a really, really young age. I really feel that nature, being interactive outdoors, has huge benefits on our physical and mental well-being, particularly for young kiddies.
He notes that this was one of the first events in late 2019 in which Kate did not seem to appear nervous. Again, it's understandable that Kate would be nervous, but the job of a royal family member is first and foremost to be a media personality. It's somewhat bizarre that this part of the job description is one of Kate's weaknesses, or at least it was for most of her time in the royal family until now. It seems that only now that the royal family has dwindled in numbers, with Harry and Meghan having left their posts as working royals, that the palace has pushed Kate to take a more front-facing role within the institution. This has pushed her out of her comfort zone and into the spotlight in more ways than one. In terms of PR related to public works, Kate's main charitable focus has been on what I would call wifely duties, being a good wife and mother. This might be a genuine interest of hers, but unfortunately, it plays into the conservative mindset of the institution perfectly. Her campaign to raise awareness of the importance of early childhood development feeds into this narrative, and as with most royal family work, actually does very little for the British subjects for whom their work is meant to support. Yes, early childhood development is important, but Kate's work doesn't actually focus on what would aid in supporting those crucial early years, i.e., government funding. The kind of government funding, in fact, that the Labour Party put in place in the late 90s, only for the Conservative Party to cut it significantly. Yet again, it's an example of royals talking the talk without walking the walk. They get to claim it's because calling for government action is political, but education is political. Early childhood development is political. Every aspect of how public education is handled is political. And calling for certain programs is a call for political action. Once again, I am frustrated by the royals, basically an extension of the Conservative Party, yet again, unwilling to call for effective policy, which would benefit their constituents. Scobie quotes Dr. Mine Concubier, who said, quote, "We are well accustomed to MPs visiting early year settings, but nothing is done. The time has long passed for awareness. We need action, long-term investment, and funding in the early years." Kate's image is essentially as, quote, "a symbol of refined beauty, and those white English rose genetics the British newspapers love so much. A focus on pure white beauty alongside motherhood, like it's basically all the components of a trad wife, white supremacist meme on the internet. Like I said before, you could put a picture of Kate Middleton next to the white supremacist 14 words, and it wouldn't be too out of place with her branding. Hilary Mantel, a famous British writer who has previously written about the royals, noted, according to Scobie, it almost seemed that appearing this way was Kate's sole purpose for the firm, especially after she birthed an heir. I saw Kate becoming a jointed doll on which certain rags are hung, Mantel wrote, adding that the Duchess appeared like a, quote, shop window mannequin with no personality of her own, entirely defined by what she wore. It seems that the only reason why there has been some course correction on this purely motherhood angle is the need for Kate to take on a much larger role within the institution as the number of working royals has dwindled. She seems somewhat keen to step up, but also hesitant and nervous. The Where is Kate debacle is an extreme case of how her camera-shy nature and her inability to pivot into a stronger, less delicate flower image could cause massive issues for the family's PR. The colossal fuck-ups related to the press surrounding Kate are, in my opinion, directly connected to this weak image she projected to the world, which encouraged the fervor of internet denizens to be concerned for her in a way that I can imagine would not be similar for anyone in the family who is not an English Rose. Especially with Kate's cancer diagnosis, which still seems a bit confusing in my opinion. Will Kate be able to perform this crucial role of keeping the entire monarchy afloat? Only time will tell. Probably she will be unable to take on this larger role that the institution has envisioned for her, at least not until she's cancer-free. Without her as the key to bringing media attention to the firm, it's going to be a tough ride for the next few years, which leads us to Chapter 13, A Dangerous Game. Royals and the Media. An apt name for the title, as not only is the relationship between the firm and the British press toxic, but also leads to real-life harm and threats to public family members' physical and mental safety. But before we get into that extreme harm, I think there are more important social harms, which Scobie shines a light on. The first harm I identify is the way that the British media exists to consolidate power into the hands of the most privileged. In this chapter, Scobie analyzes the almost parasitic relationship between the firm and the British media. Both need each other to maintain power, influence, and above all, money. However, the fear of the end of the monarchy, an end to that power, drives both sides to behave in dysfunctional and abusive ways, out of fear that that success will dry up. Other than to defend the institution at all costs, both sides cannot see any other way than to maintain the status quo. Scobie separates three ways that the family disseminates information: the royal rota, leaking and planting stories, and more nefarious obstruction. He first brings his attention to the Royal Rota, a small group of papers, mostly tabloids, who have exclusive access to royal family stories and engagements. The Rota is led, in one of the most obvious conflicts of interest imaginable, by Rebecca English, the royal editor of the Daily Mail. The same Rebecca English that was prosecuted in a court of law for illegal information gathering by hacking and stalking Prince Harry and his friends. Hard-hitting journalism here when it comes to the heart of British government, I say, rolling my eyes. One reporter notes that with English at the helm, quote, they essentially put the Mail in charge of it all. She often rigs things to make sure that she gets all the good engagements, keeping certain information from the palace, and will do anything to make sure the Rota doesn't grow. If your alarm bells aren't going off, that the head of the news organization, whose job it is to disseminate information about the royal family, is a close personal friend of various family members, and is the editor of a tabloid with various competitors, and total control of the narrative coming out of the palace? Yeah, I don't know what to tell you, but that sounds like corruption. There's a recap of some of the legal battles between Harry and Meghan and the Daily Mail, and once again we get confirmation that the family did their utmost, including putting former Comms Secretary Jason Knopf front and center to play defense to tank this case. As thanks for his attempt to throw himself in front of the metaphorical bullet, Knopf was, surprise, surprise, rewarded with the Royal Victorian Order. It is clear that the family is protective of the Mail in a way that is unhealthy in a democratic society. To them, because of their tight relationship with the Mail, going against them legally is equivalent to attacking the propaganda arm of the firm. A source says, quote, the paper had pretty much become an extension of the palace communications team, and to lose that would have had a detrimental impact on the monarchy as a whole. It sounds extreme, but the Mail's positive coverage and its huge audience play a huge part in helping prop up the popularity of the royal family. The other societal harm, I believe, that comes from this dangerous relationship is how it erodes media literacy and analysis by the British public. Many Brits, from my experience and from statistics, do not trust their media. However, my personal hypothesis is that this is only exacerbated by a completely fucking bonkers media environment in which real journalism is placed in tandem with absolute trash. The problem is, I'd argue, unique to the UK in a bad way, and leads to Brits overall being unable to engage critically with their national media. One important note Scobie adds is how tabloids in the UK are treated much differently than they would be in, say, the US or continental Europe. This is something I have personal experience with since I lived in the UK for about 5 years. In the US, it is unusual for anybody that wants to be taken seriously to mention the tabloids. When you watch a straight news program like CNN or CBS News, they will almost never mention any quotes or headlines from a tabloid. In the UK, this is not the case. Despite many people disparaging tabloids as unreliable, they permeate the entire media ecosystem. If you watch straight news like BBC or Channel 4, often they will openly discuss headlines from the tabloids, like the Daily Mail or The Sun. Comedy news shows like Mock the Week or Have I Got News for You will regularly pull from tabloid headlines for content to discuss or joke about. Quote, for many of those outside of the United Kingdom, the country's tabloid culture is hard to fathom. In the United States and most of Europe, tabloid periodicals are rarely taken seriously. They are trivial publications, usually regulated to grocery store checkout lines and doctors' waiting rooms. But for those living in Britain, they are part of the national fabric and the country's collective conversations. This blurred line between tabloids and journalism erodes faith in discovering truth, which is the purpose of a free press. It is exactly the same reason why Fox News is so critiqued in the United States. Yes, it can be fun to read gossipy mags occasionally. Our conversations should be surrounding the news, actual news. As in investigating people in positions of power, asking difficult questions, holding the 1% accountable for their actions. This also means with such a terrible media ecosystem, Brits become over-reliant on trusting their state media, the BBC, for accurate journalism. I have a whole video about the BBC if you want to go check that out. And yes, the BBC is good, but also it's fucking state-run media. Of course there is bias there, especially when it comes to the royal family. The chapter even ends with an ominous line that, quote, shortly after taking the throne, the king held at least 2 clandestine meetings with BBC executives. These discussions were part of the monarch's effort to ensure that the network properly covers his work as king, in spite of all the drama surrounding the institution. Throughout the history of the family, maintaining a media presence has been the key to their success. For monarchy, it is to maintain status without public buy-in. In order to stop any revolutionary activity or thinking, the monarch must project a positive image to the public at large. I highly recommend my video on the Thai monarchy if you want to see this progression within a different royal family context. The parallels between how Thailand transitioned into the 20th century and how the British royal family did are uncanny. There are different flavors of this positive image. The first is probably the most obvious. Royals must claim to positively serve the nation. Historically, this was considered a given, as monarchs were absolute rulers. It was taken as fact that the king was working to protect the interests of the nation state. In the modern era, this is why they connect themselves to charity work. Without an obvious connection to political power, charity virtue signals a commitment to assisting the common citizenry. The second image, which is the most in decline for the firm, is as leaders of other British institutions, such as the Church of England and the military. Scobie notes, and I mentioned this while discussing Charles in my part 1 video, that these two avenues for continuing power are closing. A huge decline in religion. Only 6% of the adult British population currently identify as practicing Christians, and a vast reduction in the country's military power have left the media as the only viable institution left to effectively prop up the monarchical system. The third media image required for maintaining influence, therefore, is to project a sense of being role models as aspirational figures meant to be emulated by the common folk. As individual monarchs lost the power to directly control the nation through policy, the institution shifted to focusing on the royal family as a unit unto itself. The family, therefore, became a model for proper etiquette and manners, good breeding and education, good citizenship. No longer was one man or one woman the focus of a direct communicator with God, but the family is a mirror of an average family to aspire to strive to become through pulling up their bootstraps. This crafted image is most often disseminated by the Royal Rota and other royal-friendly publications, vetted for their positive coverage, and then given stories in exchange for their friendliness. However, focusing only on delivering positive stories is only half the battle. The family also needs negativity and outrage to satiate the press, who use these stories of drama as their bread and butter to sell papers. The family doesn't want to be openly negative or disparage other members in public. Thus, with their connections, they turn to the second option of disseminating information, leaking and planting stories. Through doing backdoor dealings with various journalists, members of the family can ensure positive coverage for themselves, while also trading in negative stories about others. These are used as bait to turn public conversation into anger or disgust at lower-ranking members, while keeping the reputation of higher-ranking members more clean. Scobie discusses Kensington Palace's history of leaking and briefing in the most detail, probably because Scobie has the most first-hand knowledge of these stories, since he was closely working with Buckingham Palace around the time of massive tensions between the Cambridge and Sussex camps. He notes that Christian Jones, Simon Case, and Jason Knopf were heavily involved in these briefings from around 2019 to 2021. The final means by which the royal family operates with the media, as we also noted in the Diana chapter in my second video of the series, is through using their power and influence as a tool for censorship. Scobie gives a few examples, some of which involve him personally. The first is with the broadcast of the original firm-sanctioned documentary that aired in 1969 on the BBC.
Be carrying on the family business, which doesn't mean being solemn all the time.
No, she was trying so hard not to laugh.
When your mother was saying, tips up into a lap, Osborne when she was very old, and the ambassador came into the Durbar room, that great long room, and he skidded and he landed, feet first at the bottom of the steps of the throne, and all the others, having the most terrible trouble to avoid exploding in laughter.
After it aired, despite being well received, the family campaigned to have it removed from the archive, essentially relegating it to lost media. Another example is when Scobie is invited to speak for the ITV documentary, Harry and William, What Went Wrong. In it, Scobie discusses how Prince William's team leaked stories about William's concern for Harry's mental health after Harry had made comments related to growing distant from his brother. Kensington Palace pressured ITV to remove the clip from the program, and there was 5 seconds of silence in the original broadcast. Quote, "Furious that I had exposed this, Kensington Palace, personally instructed by William," one of his aides let slip, rapidly intervened and applied the requisite pressure to stop the truth from spreading. I am astounded by what the family can get away with in terms of censorship. It should not be possible for someone who will one day become the head of multiple nations to control the narrative related to him in such a way. This is not what a free press is meant to look like. For too long, there has been this type of wheeling and dealing with the royals and the press. And in a modern society, this has no place. There should be no censorship that protects the rich and influential in this way. Hey, speaking of trying to take down the rich and powerful, Chapter 14. The Decay of Years. All you need to know is that this chapter starts with this quote from a then Prince Charles in 1994. "Something as curious as the monarchy won't survive unless you take account of people's attitudes. After all, if people don't want it, they won't have it." In this chapter, Scobie dives into the monarchy's tensions with lowercase r Republican sentiments, which of course have ebbed and flowed throughout history. But in the year of our Lord, 2025, it seems perhaps we might see a breaking point emerge. Overall, more than any other time in recent history, people do not want this institution. And listen, I'm glad that the Brits are getting with the times. The British Isles literally saw democracy spread throughout the globe for nearly 200 years. Partially in response to their and other European nations' awful, disgusting colonial past. It might be time for these ideals to plant themselves fully within the British governmental system. What Scobie identifies as the biggest hurdle for Republicans is a public's apathy to changing the current system. This apathy is really what grinds my gears the most. If it isn't clear, I'm not one to idly sit by and stick to the status quo. But the British cultural landscape is one in which citizens come to passively accept the bullshit. This might be changing, but it's changing really slowly. Scobie name-checks a familiar face on this channel, Graham Smith, the CEO of Republic UK, an organization that works to dismantle the monarchy with a plea for a new British constitution.
So why do you want to end the British monarchy? What's it done to you, Graham?
Well, same as it does
to your job. I mean, you must care so deeply about it.
Same it does to all of us. I mean, there's a few basic points. The first one is just a matter of principle. You know, we are Democrats in this country. Most of us, the vast majority of us, believe in democracy. Increasingly, most of us, I think, don't necessarily believe in the British variant of democracy. We have a lot of problems with, a whole raft of issues such as the electoral system, the way the House of Commons works, the House of Lords, and all the rest of it. But the Crown is, at the centre of that, and the monarchy is at the centre of that. And Democrats should not be supporting an institution that rests on an entirely different set of values, which is, sort of feudal values of bloodline, elitism, exceptionalism, and that should be enough for most people. But if you're not that convinced about the principle, the institution itself is not fit for purpose. It is not going too far to say that it's corrupt, which is not about criminal or illegal behaviour. It's about sort of abuse of public office in terms of public money, abuse through lobbying behind closed doors. And there's a whole raft of issues in the way in which that institution operates. Not to mention the family themselves, who are not people we would vote for if we had a free and fair election. But then the Crown itself, you've got the principle in the palace, but the Constitution itself is pretty awful. I mean, some people like to think that we've got this constitution, the mother of parliaments, which is envied around the world, and it isn't. Most countries that have parliamentary democracies have do it better than we do. And the Crown is a big part of that because it centralises power in the hands of Downing Street at the expense of Parliament and the rest of us. So, whichever way you cut it, it's not an institution we should be supporting.
The group is partially responsible for the success of the Not My King campaign, which now follows King Charles basically anywhere that he goes. According to Smith, no one is suggesting that Britain move to a US or French-style constitution. It's about moving to a parliamentary democracy. Maybe Smith is an incrementalist, but I'm not. I am absolutely advocating for a US-style constitution. But whatever, I'll take any constitution at this point. If you're more curious about Republic UK and what they are advocating more for the UK government, I highly recommend checking out their website. Some highlights include, quote, in 1689, Parliament effectively seized the crown, and from then on, the monarchs served at the pleasure of Parliament, rather than the other way around. And the monarch does serve at Parliament's pleasure because political leaders get so much power from the crown. It's no wonder governments are always quick to defend the monarchy. People always talk about Britain being a parliamentary democracy, but we're a constitutional monarchy that has a parliament. And there is a difference, which is the crown in parliament and the lack of limitations on parliament or government. The answer is a genuine parliamentary democracy, taking everything we have and making it democratic. A fully elected parliament, sovereignty of the people enshrined in a constitution, and an effective, elected, non-partisan head of state. It's hard to argue against these reasonable, common sense ideas. Looking around, Britain's glory days are long since past. Scobie notes that, quote, the British economy will fall behind much of their European neighbors, including Poland by 2030 and Romania and Hungary by 2040. The rebranding of colonialism as the Commonwealth is slowly disappearing as these former colonies step away from the UK. Scotland, which, if you don't know the history, is literally half the kingdom in United Kingdom, has toyed with separating from England. And the Scottish National Party previously had a decent stronghold in the country, although recently that has waned. Scobie writes that David Cameron even asked the Queen to, quote, make the public intervention when she, quote, expressed hope that voters will, quote, think very carefully about the future when voting in the Scottish independence referendum. If that isn't the monarchy being used for political purposes, I don't know what is. Even previous strongholds like Australia are growing more Republican over time. Some Australian politicians now openly call for leaving the monarchy behind. The staggering amount of wealth that the royals hold is also catching up to them as their finances become more transparent and real journalists move to criticize their fortune. This nostalgia for an old-fashioned cosplay is wearing thin when in the modern era, The Guardian is able to report that King Charles's net worth is around 1.8 billion pounds. They have also reported that the Queen and King Charles, quote, both took cash payments worth around 1.2 billion from, quote, 2 hereditary estates that pay no tax. On top of this tax-free hoarded wealth, they still continuously get funds from the sovereign grant, i.e. taxpayers, to the tune of 86.3 million pounds, a number which, thanks to the government of David Cameron, will never decrease, and in fact is scheduled to increase by about 45% from 2025. Despite all this, however, what matters most is that Britain wakes up to this decline of the empire and realizes that the monarchy is a burden unto itself. One argument against change is that the royal family is harmless. They don't have power, they don't cost that much, they bring in tourism.
I say the royals are worth every penny that this country gives them, which, by the way, is literally 1 penny per person in this country per year. Per day. Per day, not a year. So it's a penny a day per person in the country.
Well, it's not. And the first thing to say about this debate is that the monarchy is not a financial transaction. So whether makes a profit or not is neither here nor there. The measure of whether it's a good institution and worth keeping is whether it's good constitutionally, because that's what it's there for.
Why? And they bring in so much money from tourism.
Well, that's not true.
But it is true.
No, it isn't. That's definitely not true. It's definitely not true. Now, the thing is, there is no evidence. And I've sat down with the CEO and chair of Visit Britain about a decade ago, and I said, there's no evidence that if we got rid of the monarchy, tourism would go down. And they said, yes, you're absolutely
You don't
right.
think the royal family brings in any money from tourism?
No evidence that tourism money wouldn't come in anyway.
I mean, if you just look at the money that came in the weeks leading up to these big events that we've had over the last 4 years,
look at the
huge amounts of money.
If you look at the visitor numbers,
American tourists pouring in, Australian tourists,
the
Canadian
visitor numbers
tourists
go down when these things happen. If you look at the visitor numbers, they go down when these
People
things
stay
happen.
away from these kind of things. And if I may say, Cheshire Zoo is a bigger tourist attraction in the UK than Buckingham Palace or Windsor Castle.
These arguments stem from ignorance, and ignorance is one of the biggest concerns going forward for the anti-monarchist cause. Too many Brits are ignorant about the royals, about their systems. I've had conversations with Brits who mistook the Prime Minister as the head of state of the UK. I've had Brits not be able to explain how a law is passed. I've had Brits claim that the royals bring in tons of tourism money, when by all metrics they do not. Scobie cites that only 0.3% of tourism revenue pre-COVID was related to anything royal, which is pretty pathetic. If Brits don't understand their systems, they won't understand enough to be outraged. The other cause of public apathy is Brits' casual belief that most other Brits support the monarchy. British people, culturally, seem very hesitant to stand out. I am a big, dumb, loud American. I have no problem being myself and standing out. British people are not like that. If they think other people think a certain way, they often just keep quiet and don't push back. If they think the majority has reached a consensus on something, they will rarely openly voice any dissent to the majority opinion. Scobie notes that many Brits believe the monarchy is more popular than it actually is due to misleading polling. Quote, with regards to their popularity, the feeling is that most people who like the monarchy do so because they believe others do as well, often a direct result of deceptive polling and reporting. As an example, if there is an opinion poll that states 75% of the population want to, quote, keep the monarchy, the result is often misreported in the media as 75%, quote, love the monarchy, which obviously makes it sound more popular than it really is.
Get back to the king, should we? And whether or not the royal family is something that we want. Statista is suggesting over 60% of people in the UK support keeping the monarchy, and also suggests that people supporting an elected head of state is steadily growing.
Yes, I mean, the point is that some polling has put it down consistently below 60%. There were a couple of polls this year that put it below 50%. Now, for people under the age of 50, it's consistently under 50% in a number of polls. And I know Rafe is going to mention one poll particularly because he calls it the gold standard, the Ipsos Mori. He calls it that because it's the one that consistently puts it over 60. But even on those polls, it has dropped considerably from sort of highs of 85% just a few years ago.
The problem with this type of go-with-the-flow attitude is that it allows for a ridiculous amount of inherited wealth to continue to trickle into the family's pockets, while millions of hardworking Brits struggle to keep the lights on or to put food on the table. Scobie ends the chapter with the problem with this apathy. Quote, monarchies look out for themselves and are propelled by their own agendas, interests, and bank accounts. This enormous fortune speaks volumes about the monarchy's motivation to stick around way beyond its sell-by date, and why they use the idea of serving the crown as a protective shield. If all of this is about duty to the state and a commitment for a better Britain, then it doesn't look so much like an ungodly amount of inherited wealth as it does well-earned compensation for services rendered. As long as they are cutting ribbons, sharing cute portraits of their children, and doing enough work, they trust the public will agree to keep them on as a harmless anachronism and a uniquely British spectacle. My biggest concern for the Republican cause is if we skate through Charles's reign, William is popular enough that citizens will be unwilling to challenge his reign or the monarchy with the same BS if it ain't broke, don't fix it mentality. But as is so obvious for anyone outside of England, this system is indeed broken. The system is designed to take millions of pounds out of government coffers, which could aid in better social programs, better education, better health care, and puts it into some random family's tax shelter. If this information continues to come to light, if Republic UK's messaging finally grabs hold of the public, and if enough former British colonies finally make the arguments that British citizens have been making for hundreds of years, then maybe there is some hope. But only time will tell, which means it's time to wrap up with... Chapter 15. Chapter 15 just wraps up the situation as it was current with the publishing of this book. Not much for me to say about it. Charles and Camilla don't give a fuck about anything other than themselves. William and Kate are barely working, and Harry and Meghan are out west living their best life. The end. JK. The chapter uses the coronation of King Charles as an illustration for the issues with the monarchy, their alchemy to make pomp and circumstance out of absolute bullshit, and how as we move into a modern era, the mask of the monarchy is slowly slipping. Scobie highlights that this coronation continued in the path set by other royal events, namely in its emphasis on being televised. Hundreds of cameras were placed around Westminster Abbey to capture the event in 4K. Quote, just like those 4K cameras at Charles's coronation, we can now see the world at large more clearly, at times forced to take the unvarnished realities at a disorienting pace. The contrast between modernity allowing us to see the coronation with new levels of clarity, but allowing us to see things in a less glamorous way, is the main crux of the thesis that the monarchy is in its endgame. What once might have been able to fool us cannot hold up to the scrutiny of modern media. Scobie gives the example of how Prince Charles's investiture ceremony in 1969 was essentially manufactured out of whole cloth to appear arcane and mysterious, including a crown with a gold orb, which was in fact a plastic ping pong ball coated in gold foil. This type of magical transfiguration, tricking the audience with a plastic ping pong ball while pretending that this ceremony is dignified and important, would be unthinkable in the era of 4K television. In this way, Scobie is highlighting that this type of trickery is no longer possible for the institution. This ceremony also highlights the roles of all the family members and what the future looks like for them. William as heir pledging loyalty to his father, while also using an Uber Eats ad director to advertise his own future reign. Camilla smirks as she's finally crowned as queen after her long, hard media battle to be accepted by the British public. Meghan is completely excluded. Harry is given a cold shoulder and avoids being in Britain for too long. And Andrew is not only allowed to show his face in public, but also to wear his fancy ceremonial clothes as if nothing has happened. As for the issues that lie ahead for the firm, Scobie writes, Britain is in a tailspin, and the turmoil's end is nowhere in sight. In the past, the family and the institution have seized crises as opportunities to showcase their importance, to highlight monarchical stability and continuity. It's different now. There isn't a war, so far anyway, that the establishment can use to galvanize support. Only a nation in severe economic and reputational decline, and one fighting for a new identity. The success of the monarchy, by its very nature, is wrapped up in the success of Britain as a nation state. And currently, Britain is failing. It is failing due to a lack of progressive policies, hindered by 13 years of conservative rule, and a Labour Party that's turning its back on the working class. It is failing because it lost its empire, which sustained its global relevance. It is failing because it's clinging on to ancient institutions, like the monarchy, that go against the interests of the common people. The very values and traditions that the monarchy wishes to uphold are the ones that will cause an even greater decline in the British nation. They must change, but there is no change that could occur that would make monarchy moral. All they can do is to adapt enough to keep the people apathetic, willing to accept the status quo, and willing to believe in the magic. With that being said, let's wrap up our series. What have we learned from Endgame? And what are the moves to look out for as we see the match play out? 1. Charles and Camilla. They are going to do their best at doing what they've always done. Charles will continue to do shady business dealings and get himself involved in politics, no matter what anyone else says. Camilla will just sit around as she lets her media friends write puff pieces about her. They will continue to collect millions of pounds of wealth while pushing their message of a slimmed-down monarchy that continues to cost the taxpayer more and more. Number 2, William. He will continue his metamorphosis into a cold company man, calculating how to make his future reign seem more appealing to the apathetic public who don't know much about him personally. He will work quietly in the shadows and work with his comms team to secretly undermine his father's messaging. However, he will continue in his father's footsteps by continuing the system of briefs and leaks, using connections to the media to suit his political purposes. Number 3, Kate. She will just be there as the only charismatic draw to the family. She will probably avoid the spotlight, especially after the giant "Where is Kate" debacle, and thus there will not be much for tabloids to sink their teeth into. She will continue to try to sit still, look pretty, until the crown is on her head, unless she wakes up and realizes that the institution doesn't give a damn about her. But there's no signs of that happening in the moment. Number 4, Harry and Meghan. They will be the new face of media reform, working to sound the alarm on bad media practices, the dangers of social media, and avoiding the toxicity of the firm and their media pals. They'll avoid most of the other working royals, pursue their own passion projects, and try to keep their children safe. Number 5, the public. It is up to the British public to educate themselves on the intricacies of their systems, thinking about how a new constitution could lead to better social outcomes for the nation, and calling out the royals for their bullshit. Republic UK has done a great job so far of bringing anti-monarchism to the forefront of the conversation, but there is a long way to go. The apathy of the British public must end. Right now, with the dire political and economic situation, the British public might mistakenly believe that there is no point on focusing on ending monarchism. What they are ignorant on is how the crown being at the center of the government and its lack of constitution is precisely why they are in this bad political situation. Without proper democracy, without a government made solely of elected officials, without a constitution, and without checks and balances, the nation will be doomed to continue the cycle of catering only to the most rich and powerful. In my opinion, there will be no political progress, no progressive government policies, no focus on solutions for the most marginalized in society until there is a full overhaul of the British political system. The time is now in the endgame. And with that, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this, give it a like, leave a comment, subscribe. I hope to see you in the next one. Bye.
What about William's campaign at the moment to end homelessness?
Yeah, fantastic. Funded by what?
Funded by us.
And what's this, like £3 million pounds?
So you don't like his campaign against homeless?
I think it's wonderful.
What have you got against the homeless?
It's nothing he couldn't do as a private citizen.
We give him £22 million.
What do you have against the homeless?
What is it?
We give him £22 million. We could spend that on.
You don't want him to help the homeless?
That's the most ludicrous thing you've said on this show, and that says a lot.